Was geht, meine lieben Freunde, ein und ihr herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Haus im Fata Morgana Folge und direkt mit dem Soundtrack geht es rein, Freunde. Letztes Mal haben wir die ganzen Schlüssel bekommen von Jacopo, dem Beast und Mel.
Und jetzt,
Ehrlich gesagt war das mit Mel am schlimmsten.
ja, und jetzt werden wir anscheinend die Vergangenheit der Glückslehnen Morgana. Ich freue mich auch.
Wir sind heute in der 70. Folge übrigens, Freunde.
Ich freue mich, ob das jetzt auch die Door 7 ist, die startet, weil bis jetzt ist noch keine Door 7 gestartet.
Ja.
Alles gut.
Let's go. I carry with in me the child of God. That is where it all began.
Hier Jesus.
The words of one foolish woman determined the course of my entire... Dann kannst du ja, weil du hast Fata Morgana. Du hast ja Morgana gelesen und ich hab nicht.
Jetzt ist Morgana gerade.
Safe.
Okay, the words of one foolish woman determined the course of my entire life.
Wie erzählt dir die Story?
Story. Before I was even born, my fate was decided. Did her claim come from faith? Was it her way of escaping reality? Did she do it for money or fame? I don't know. I've been visited by an angel of the Lord. Wir hätten eigentlich auch drauf kommen müssen, dass irgendwas so, ne, ist mit so Archangel Michael. So from the thematics of the story, meine ich. The village where she lived had suffered from years of poor harvest. It had been months since the last rain, and all the villagers prayed desperately to be blessed with succor. I am with child, though I have known no man. So proclaimed the pregnant woman in the midst of the drought. And on the day of my birth, the very moment I let was my first cry, heavy rain fell down upon the village. The storm quenched the parched earth, nourishing the crops and saving the village. The villagers were astounded, for they had thought the drought would never end. As plump drops of rain poured down upon the village, they gathered around the newborn me in exultation. Ah, she's the child of God. Perhaps there would be more wonder in claiming I had magical powers. Perhaps it would make a better story if I were to say there were higher forces involved. But all these years later, here is what I truly think. It was nothing more than a fluke. An impossible stroke of luck. An unbelievable fortunate accident for my mother in the village, and an indescribably unfortunate accident for myself. I am with child, though I have known no man. Haha, as if that's even possible. Maybe she had fooled around with the man who had gone and abandoned her, and she spotted those lies to convince herself it had never happened. None of the village men made any claim to be my father. Perhaps he was someone else's husband, and as such he couldn't reveal himself, as adultery is a sin in the eyes of God.
Also erst muss ich sagen,
So genau wie Jesus.
sehr interesting hier, und zweitens, ich finde es sehr cool, wie es hier so, wie es so nicht unten erzählt wird, sondern so als, ne,
Ja.
wie es so anders ist. Ich wollte hier ein Foto. Das ist richtig cool. Ja, Freunde, by the way, sei halt und lass lange noch da. Trinkt immer schon Water, Gott.
Morgana is Jesus confirmed. The girl they were praising as the child of God was indeed not more than the ordinary daughter of a rich woman. At the time, though, I thought differently. I believed my mother's words, convinced I was a saint.
Wie mir.
Ich dachte jetzt
Also,
Franklin Saint. Oh, ja.
ja, wie mir sagt, ich bin Ymir.
Ja. And gave me sense of duty, of purpose, rather than superiority. As the daughter of God, I believed it was my responsibility to help anyone in need. So every day I prayed. I asked my father what I could do, what I was meant to do. Not everyone is equally good, however. There will always be someone who lends their ear to the devil's whispers.
So geiles Handwerk.
One man claimed I was the daughter of a charlatan. He shouted for all to hear, "If you really are the child of God, and perform a miracle for us. Could he have been any more unreasonable? Miracles are neither magic nor parlor tricks. They are realized through the power of faith. A lowly villager has no place demanding God prove his own divinity. It is the height of arrogance. But the man refused to heed my words. Having no other choice, I contemplated what I could do to show him I was indeed a saint. My blood was the spark of my inspiration. Michel, the time when I lived and the time when you lived were not so different. Our views and beliefs about the world are very much the same. So you should understand that in our time, blood was seen as unclean. It was a dreadful thing, ridden with diseases, which is why we drained the blood from animals and purified the flesh before consuming it. But being a saint, my blood would have been different. Like the blood of the saints who came before me, mine would be blessed. I believed it would be able to cleanse people's impurities.
Also hat sie ihr Blut genommen, damit Leute das trinken, oder was?
For my demonstration, I chose an elderly woman afflicted with a terrible disease. She was on her deathbed, and no one thought she would live for longer than another day or two. The woman was overjoyed when I came to visit her. Sincerely believing me to be a holy servant of the Lord, she gathered all the strength she could muster to climb from her bed and kiss my feet. I felt an intensely deep love for this woman. Placing my hands upon her cheeks, I said with all the kindness in my heart, "My beloved sister, partake of my blood." The woman agreed without a glimpse of hesitation, and so I pricked the tip of my finger with the knife and let the blood drip into her mouth. Within 3 days, her health had improved enough for her to get out of bed unassisted. Seeing that, no one in the village doubted my powers any longer. In fact, the man who had accused me of being the daughter of a charlatan was subsequently punished for his sins. He received much deserved retribution for challenging the daughter of God, for mocking her. But of course, being a saint, I forgave the man. He in turn repented and changed his ways, worshipping me as the true child of God. Now, I'll be honest with you, I was ecstatic, utterly elated. I felt like I was on top of the world, and I reveled in it. The villagers showered me with adulteration. They revered me, the daughter of God. Anyone who didn't was punished. And on top of that, my blood could cause miracles. Tell me, do you look down on me for feeling the way I did? The actual child of God would never let herself be consumed by such base emotions, would she? But if you would give me a chance, I would like to explain myself. I was but a young girl at the time, and to a child, her mother is the world. Anything she says is absolute truth. So when my mother claims to happen to be coincide with a lucky miracle, my young mind was set in stone. I was a saint. My blood could heal the sick, and nothing would convince me otherwise. After all, I was but a girl of 6 years old. It is not my place to decide whether my blood truly had miraculous powers or not. If you think it did, then it did. And if you think it was all a happenstance, then so it was. Miracles are brought about by faith. So the elderly woman who was healed was done so by the power of her own belief. Baseless hope and desire at times make the otherwise impossible reality.
Das wurde auch mal gesagt bei Erased, dass man schneller heilen kann, wenn man es unbedingt will.
Ja.
Und wenn man wirklich glaubt, dass man es hinkriegt. Das war cool.
You understand just how major a role religion played in our time, don't you, Michel? Especially as someone whose life was taken from him in the name of God. And you understand how powerful word of mouth can be as well, don't you? It didn't take long for word of the miracle performing child of God to spread.
Ja, deswegen kamen Leute und haben sie dann, ich call am Ende, die wurde irgendwie so immer benutzt, man hat immer so Blut von ihr getappt, um damit Leute zu heilen, wenn man
Ja,
das und dachte, so
so sind die gestorben.
unfortunate for you. Schätze ich mal.
Travelers from faraway lands came to our village all in search of aid. Driven by a mixture of elation and duty, I gave my blessings unto every pilgrim who sought them. I gave them my blood. Yes. My young hands were virtually covered in wounds. Running out of skin on my fingers, I cut the back of my hands, my palms, my wrists. Oof. For long they had turned into swollen, coughed up black and red horrors. And so I kept them wrapped in cloth all the times. The only time I uncovered them was to give blood to those who sought it. My lacered hands were in no uncertain terms gruesome and unsightly. But the believers who came to see me all wept at my selfless sacrifice. And so I came to cherish these wounds. There were some for whom no miracle took place, but whenever that would happen, the villagers would come out and say, "The daughter of God is not to blame, you simply lack sufficient faith." Dazu ihre Gläser.
Ja.
Thus, such incidents had no negative effect on my reputation as a saint. For 3 years I continued doling out blessings. One day, while I was offering a prayer, my mother let slip her discontent.
For 3 years, so bis sie 9 war.
Stimmt. Gut.
Why must you hand out miracles for nothing? Why must you give strangers grace? Ja, stimmt, jetzt so, give me money. Will die Geld rausmachen.
Stell dir vor, so Jesus, so, ja, ich halte dich für 10 Euro.
Ja, safe. We should be getting compensated. Ja, die Mutter will das Geld süchtig. We deserve remuneration. What? Wenn ihr wisst, was das heißt, die Freunde, dann schreibt es in die Kommentare. Vergütung. Okay. If we charge just a little bit for each blessing, we could be living in so much more comfortably,
I was dumbfounded. How could the mother of a saint how could the mother of a saint say such things? Helping people was my divine calling, and she expected payment? I nearly wept, hearing my mother preoccupied with such worldly desires. Vor allem, die braucht er nicht unbedingt, oder? Das ist doch so eher, wenn sie von allen so in den Himmel gelobt wird oder so, dann würden die ihr so Sachen schenken, denke ich. Oder wenn sie irgendwo hingeht, dann doch so, ja. Das ist die. Ja.
Ja, aber sie würde es deshalb ablehnen. Weil sie sich ja so fühlt als Saint, ne?
So I explained to her how important this work was. I taught her that we were not covered material wealth, that we were to dedicate our lives to the service of our fellow man. You're right.
You're right, my dear saint.
She said, understanding. And I believed her. I fell asleep that night, convinced she should understood, and that there would be no more problems. But the next day, I was sold off. Men I had never seen before carried me by the arms and tossed me into a carriage. Confused and panicked, I stuck my head out, searching for my mother. Off in the shadow of the house, I saw her with a strange man, accepting a bag of coins. The carriage. The carriage rocked back and forth as it rolled along the dirt road, shaking and bouncing within it. I struggled with overwhelming grief and despair. It was perhaps the first time in my life I had felt such powerful emotion. I didn't know what I felt so much despair over though. Obviously, it was over my present predicament, but I wasn't sure what about it hurt the most. Was it that I had been pawned off like a slave? Was it that my mother, the mother of a saint, had been blinded by money? Was it that the villagers had watched in silence as the discipline of the Lord was thrown into a carriage? Or was it that I, daughter of God, lamented my misfortune like a mortal? I decided it was a trial. My father, the Lord God, was testing my worthiness of being his daughter, so I choked back my urge to cry and sat there in silent contemplation. For almost 3 weeks I rocked around in the carriage. The coachman treated me well enough, but I'm certain it was only because he didn't want his precious cargo dying before he could deliver it. He did not, by any means, think me the child of God. The third week the carriage arrived at the city. It was much larger than the village I had grown up in, with many more people crowding the streets. Something about them felt different too. There was spoken a tongue foreign to me, which is when I realized I was far, far away from home. I was delivered to a lavishly decorated mansion of the regent's lord.
Dimension, maybe?
Brightly colored flowers bloomed vividly in the garden as guests laughed and ate extravagant meals. And in addition to them, there were probably 4 times as many slaves moving around about the grounds, getting a range of looks from everyone we passed, from smartly dressed men to scrawny, emaciated servants. I was led to the Lord's chambers. The Lord was surrounded by beautiful women. Perhaps they were slaves, or perhaps they were prostitutes. I couldn't tell. Among them were some girls hardly older than me. They all wore thin swathes of cloth, barely covering themselves at all. The Lord covered me up and down, and
Look me up and down.
sorry, the Lord looked me up and down, and with love he said,
Ha! Welcome, daughter of God. You'll be performing miracles for me now. Miracles are not something to be performed for one single person's benefit. Oh,
I replied, shocked and furious he had just said something so utterly blasphemous. In response he said,
I bought you. You are my property. You have no right to an opinion.
but I could not have any of it. I entreated him to give up his indulgent lifestyle and devote himself to the service of the Lord. But the more I pleaded, the deeper the creases on his face grew. Thinking back on it now, it was hardly surprising. A 9-year-old girl was scolding the most powerful man in the region. I believed it was my duty, and that I was only doing what was right. But he surely saw in his incredible arrogance. So the Lord forced his will upon me. He bound my hands and feet and cut me without my permission, filling a goblet with my blood and passing it around to his guests.
A saint's blood and good fortune to all. Wie auch immer mein Blut da wird, so, ne?
That was when I realized, the Lord was only interested in the approval of others. He reveled in their envy as he pranced about, showing off his curious new toy, me. He didn't need any miracles.
Mein Miracle.
He didn't. Ich war schon dabei. Ich war schon dabei. He didn't need my miracles. Neither he nor any of his guests were afflicted with disease or misfortune. They were all richly blessed. Every time he threw a banquet, he drained me of my blood. It became nearly impossible to find a spot on either of my arms that wasn't swollen and reddish black gash. And soon, because my arms weren't providing enough blood for him, the cutting spread to my legs. I lived in a haze of powerful consciousness. Honestly, I'm amazed it didn't kill me, though perhaps the Lord was simply taking care not to take more than my body could spare. Watching the wealthy partygoers laugh and sip my blood through bleary eyes, another wave of despair came over me. My miracles, my blood, were not meant to be an appetizer at a feast. They were meant for the sick and the poor. But despite my wishes, the Lord persisted to squeeze me dry day in and day out for his own enjoyment. For a while I was convinced it was all God's test, that it was all part of his plan for me, his daughter, that if I could make it through this trial, I would be allowed to go back to helping people, that man would celebrate my success, envy me, worship me, that sinners would face punishment, that divine retribution would be delivered unto all who had wronged me a saint. With each passing day my spirit grew more twisted. Could anyone have believed that scarred and bloodied girl tied up on the floor in the banquet hall was a saint? Unlikely. It was no charitable gathering, but an own holy Sabbath. Perhaps it was caused by my corrupted spirit. Perhaps it was my heart's way of crying for help. Or perhaps it was the devil giving me my witch's mark. But no matter what the cause, during one of the bloody banquets I underwent a transformation. I was half conscious as usual, when one of the guests pointed at me and shouted something. His face went pale, as if he were afraid, which I found quite curious. The Lord then approached me, grabbing me by the hair and lifting my head. He yelled something, but I was far too gone to be able to make out what he was saying. Suddenly, I found myself released from my bonds, but my body had grown so weak from being tied up for so long, I didn't have the strength to hold myself up, and so I collapsed on the floor, to the floor. I was still trying to figure out what was happening when the Lord drew a sword, raising it high above his head. His words in that moment reached me with perfect clarity.
You're a damned witch wearing a saint's skin.
A witch? Why was he calling me a witch? I was the Holy Mother of God. Or I was the Holy Daughter of God. I had certainly never made a pact with the devil. What could have given him that idea? What was in store for me now? Had God performed some kind of miracle for him? Dozens of thoughts and questions floated through my mind as death hung over me. I couldn't comprehend anything, and so I didn't feel any fear or anger at my impending death. I was simply curious. What had happened to me? But before I had the chance to find that answer, the Lord swung his blade. Okay, this was a story time.
Okay, Freunde, an der Stelle würde ich sagen, beende dieses Let's Play. Das war die Witches Story.
Vielleicht kommt Teil davon, es kommt noch mehr. Safe.
Zumindest ein Teil davon. Und auch, wer weiß, ob hier alles wirklich true ist, weil die Witch hat uns oft schon angelogen.
Einfach, es war alles Bullshit. Aus dem Arsch gezogen.
Kann sein? Vielleicht erzählt ihr das Suffering von jemand anderem, weißt du? Deswegen ist es die Wahrheit, aber es ist eine Lüge, dass es nicht sie ist. Naja. Aber vielleicht auch wahr, wir wissen es nicht. Auf jeden Fall, Freunde, an der Stelle würde ich sagen, lasst ein Abo da, nehmt den Like-Button auseinander, checkt andere Parts, Playlists, Videos, Streams ab und ey, Witch's Story hier, sehr nice, sehr interesting. Bin gespannt, was Michels Reaction jetzt darauf dann sein wird nächstes Mal und an sich, wie es jetzt dann weitergeht. Also ob wir dann jetzt einfach hochgehen oder sind wir getrappt, immer wieder und wieder, wir kommen aber nicht nach oben, egal wie weit wir laufen. Naja, das sehen wir dann nächstes Mal, Freunde. Jetzt wieder schauen, Freunde, und
reingehauen.
Ciao.